Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. Welcome. If we could ask both the Select Committee and the community to come to order, please. Shh. Thanks so much. And let me begin by welcoming everyone back to this meeting of the Select Committee on South Bay Arrivals. We have yet another working meeting scheduled today. There's a tentative agenda placed before you at your places, and you should have received this prior to the meeting. Let me just indicate for the record, I'm Supervisor Joe Simitian, Chair. To my left is Supervisor Dave Pine from San Mateo County, and to my right, John Leopold, Supervisor from Santa Cruz County, respective Vice Chairs. We are also joined today by Elizabeth Lewis, who's an alternate from Atherton. Thank you for joining us, Mayor Lewis. And we have Mary Lynn Bernald, Gary Waldeck, Bruce McPherson, Don Lane, Ed Bottorff, Mark Adiego, and Sam Hindi, who are here. So we are 11 strong, and we will hope that our 12th member joins us shortly. I do know that Kevin Maitsky from my colleague Supervisor Mike Wasserman is here with us. So thank you for being with us again, Kevin, and thanks Supervisor Wasserman for making sure that his office is well represented in this process. And I'm not sure that we have any of our other alternates here today. Don't see them yet. They may be circling for parking. All right, thank you very much. Thank you again to City of Palo Alto for hosting us. Thank you to the 3 congressional offices for continuing to provide support and backup. We have a tentative agenda. Colleagues, if you'll take a look at it, what I would like to do is just quickly explain what's here before us. There are some follow-up to issues that were raised at previous Select Committee meetings. Those are items 1A through D, and we'll come back to those in a moment if you're agreeable. Items 2 are to finish up on the FAA feasibility list, at least for the moment. You will recall that we were in the midst of a conversation about the possibility of transitioning Surfer back to Big Sur, and we had some additional information we were going to get today, I believe, from folks at the FAA. And then we had not yet taken up items that were in the 6th group of feasibility items, 6 of 6, which is listed there as well. We had then longer-term issues, which are identified here for some conversation today that have been surfaced, some process issues that have been identified for conversation today. The hope is that we'll make as much progress through the agenda today as possible. What is not on the list is the dozen to 15 or more other solutions identified by the committee and obviously members of the public through the committee. That is to be teed up at our next meeting, assuming we can make our way through this. It seemed like that was a little daunting for today, given what we still had on the to-do list. So let me just ask first, everybody agreeable with the agenda? Any questions or concerns about that before I make just an opening comment or two under follow-up? Okay, we're good to go. Yep. Under 1A, remarks from alternates to Select Committee. Colleagues, you will remember that we had questions from members of the alternate panel, of whom there are a dozen, about whether or not there was a way for them to weigh in somewhat more formally rather than simply rely on the occasional opportunity presented by somebody who couldn't make a meeting. I think there was general consensus at the last meeting that we wanted to at least give them an opportunity. My plan, with your agreement, and happy to change the plan if the committee has a different take on this, was to ask for or provide an opportunity to the alternate members at our next meeting on September the 1st for each alternate to speak for up to 3 minutes if they chose to do so. That would be an opportunity for them to say, what about this, what about that, don't think you ought to do this, don't think you ought to do that. I think that along with opportunities to participate when members are absent and their alternates are participating, that at least ensures that everybody gets a formal opportunity. There's no perfect time to provide that in my view, but as I looked at our calendar with a November 16th end date, I think is the date, 17th, excuse me, end date, it seemed to me that September 1st was sort of far enough along that people probably have some thoughts they'd like to share, but not so far along that it's too late for us to hear them and incorporate them. So that was the thinking. Unless there's some objection or a motion to change that, I will send that word out to our alternates. Everybody okay with that? Okay. And then the other thing I should say is we've had, I know I've received emails, and I suspect a number of you have, about the timeline of the committee, our decision-making timeline. I thought it was probably worth just bringing that up right now and saying we've discussed our calendar previously. We are looking to have a final report with recommendations to the members of Congress by mid-November. I understand there are people who would like us to take action sooner rather than later. I understand that there are people who would like us to piecemeal some of the recommendations and take action on those sooner rather than later. My own view is that that would be unwise. I know all of us would like this to get resolved on the fastest possible track, but I think we have learned, if nothing else, with all due respect to the folks at the FAA, that making decisions before you've had a chance to listen and process information fully can land you in a lot of trouble. And I think having experienced that once, we don't want to experience it twice. We've also got the challenge of making sure that what we do to benefit one group of folks doesn't disadvantage another group of folks. And that's a fairly complicated conversation, it seems to me, and seeing if we can seek out a win-win. So I wanted to surface it. We've got meetings scheduled, 2 in September, 2 in October, 1 in November. That is the timeline. I just wanted to make sure that we don't have anyone who wants to deviate from the timeline. If you do, this would be the time to have that conversation, because we certainly have heard from some folks who have a concern about the current schedule. Going once?
Just through the chair.
Sure.
Did you say that September 15th or September 29th is the last September meeting?
No, we have 2 meetings in August, 2 in September, and 2 in 2 in September, 2 in October, and then 1 in November. The September meeting dates, I'm just going to confirm with my staff, are on September the 1st and then the 29th. Then in October, the 2 meeting dates are the 13th of October and the 27th. And again, one of the other things that we had talked about at previous meetings, colleagues, that you'll recall, is how did we make sure we provided an opportunity to the public to comment on whatever the set of proposals coming before us was. And in order to take final action at that one meeting in mid-November, it means we need to figure out by the second meeting in October, where are we? Which means that that's the meeting where we need to have something already out and published that says, this is a draft, and again, just so everybody's clear, it's a draft. And so I think that needs to be published following our first meeting in October, roughly a week before our second meeting in October, so that the community, general public, has the opportunity to look at the draft, show up at that second meeting in October, and testify, if they wish, about whether it's thumbs up, thumbs down, like this piece, don't like that piece. One clarification or correction: I think there was a story in the Sentinel, which I still read, which suggested that there were going to be 3 different community hearings once we had a draft proposal. That is not the case. There may have been some confusion about the 3 community meetings we already had. The plan would be to have a draft document, as I say, out in mid-October, reflecting the input of this committee up through that time, publish it for general public awareness as a draft, hear about it at the second meeting in October, make edits according to the direction of this select committee, and have a final document for review and approval, hopefully, at that one meeting in November. Any other questions about timeline and process? All right. If not, then we'll move on to the other items B, C, and D under follow-up to prior select committee discussions. Clarify the July 21, 2016 and September 15, 2016 SFO procedure amendments. And colleagues, help me out here. My recollection is that where we had left this was with a sort of a question out there about whether or not the altitude at the Menlo Waypoint had been lowered in some way as a result of changes to the procedures. And there was some back and forth about that, and then ultimately an agreement from the FAA to come back with a little more clarity at today's meeting. Mr. Martin from the FAA, does that sound like what you remember?
Yes, sir. That's as I understood the question. So we did review both of the chart dates that you mentioned there in July and September, and the changes that are taking place we found that do not affect any altitudes at Menlo.
Forgive me. And I think the perception, understanding, misperception, misunderstanding, the question that was raised by some folks in the community was 4,000 feet, and then some flights were 4,000 feet and above. Those flights at 4,000 feet and above were told, no, get yourselves down to 4,000. That was perceived then by some folks in the community as, quote, lowering the altitude. Are you sharing with us that that was not, in fact, the case, or not what happened at the time, as far as you understand it?
Yeah, I just wanted to be sure that I conferred here. As you know, Ms. Wright's my technical expert, so
right.
I wanted to confer. We do not believe that the changes on these two dates change the altitudes at Menlo on the procedural changes that we published on those two dates.
Okay, good. Any other follow-up on that from members of the committee before we move on to the next item?
I do.
Please.
Through the chair. So in the letter dated May 12th, 2000 from Congresswoman Anna Eshoo, talks about new flight patterns coming from Southern California, Mexico, Phoenix, Las Vegas, Hawaii, north from Point Reyes are now crossing a navigation fix located at the Menlo Park Palo Alto border at 5,000 feet rather than the previous 4,000. It's important to note that since that glide slope angle is increased by the altitude change, and normal descent requires a maximum reduction. So she was indicating that that was a 5,000 foot altitude at those waypoints. And so why has that changed to 4,000 feet?
So specifically, the changes that came about did originally, I'm talking, let me make sure I'm clear with you. The two dates you ask us to look, these that are just occurring now, are not changes affecting Menlo, the crossing altitude at Menlo. As you have brought up, in the design that took place under the Metroplex, the altitude was set at 4,000 at Menlo, and that was specifically guided by the needs of the airlines and as safety to be able to transition onto the approach after Menlo at an altitude to stabilize and be able to land safely.
Is there any way to bring that back up?
I think that that's for me, that would be an effort to have to collaborate with the airlines again and try and see whether there is any room there. And that's certainly before the board to determine whether that's a recommendation you'd like us to take forward.
Okay.
Mayor?
Yes.
Mayor Lewis, I think what I would suggest to ensure a follow-up is we do have this outstanding list of other proposals, other suggestions as identified. Why don't we simply add that to the list for further conversation? I do think the clarification I'm getting from this conversation is that I think there was some concern that after this committee was already up and running that there were some changes made to the altitude, and I think that created some scratchiness out there, understandably. I'm hearing from Mr. Martin today. He doesn't think that's the case. You're referencing an earlier 5,000 foot level that got changed to 4,000, if I understand it, by the next gen, which is a big part of the reason we're in the room. So that's an issue that's hanging out there that I think could appropriately be discussed as part of the other issues as identified by the committee. And I will look, I don't see anyone who sees any reason why we shouldn't add that to the list. So hopefully we've got that one sorted out. 1C was a discussion of Descend Via, and forgive me, colleagues, I can't remember who raised this. Was it Ms. Bernal who raised this the last time? So why don't we ask Mr. Martin or your staff to tell us what is Descend Via and why should we care about it?
So Descend Via is what we call a phraseology that air traffic control uses in order to give instruction to pilots on how to proceed. A normal clearance, if not that descend via isn't normal, but a typical clearance would be fly this route at this altitude. Even if it's higher or lower, they would transition to that altitude if they weren't already at it. Under an optimal profile descent, that procedure will have multiple fixes and multiple altitudes. And so we developed the descend via phraseology in order to be able to clear the aircraft at the top of descent with a clearance that the pilot understood, then further required them to meet all of the points and altitudes along that procedure. So instead of being able to say to them, descend on the Surfer and maintain 8,000, they wouldn't have anything but the track of the Surfer and 8,000 as a clearance. When we say descend via the Surfer arrival, they have to go through each of the windows over the appropriate fixes as they descend. So we needed a more robust clearance to assign them multiple altitudes and fixes in a short phraseology.
And Ms. Bernal, if you'd like to follow up, and forgive me, I can't remember why we were probing this issue the last time we had the conversation.
Excuse me, I had a late meeting last night, so I apologize for my voice. When you are doing descend via, does that then create stair stepping to a greater extent than if the pilot is going into an idle glide as the pilot descends?
I would say that a descent via should result in the aircraft flying their optimized descent profile, which should not be leveling off. So
Sure.
I would say if you were going to choose one or the other, you would choose descend via, because that profile should fit that glide path that we're trying to get them on. When you clear an aircraft to a specific altitude, at many times it's what we would call pilot discretion. So the pilot could descend right down to that altitude, level off and fly at it, or the pilot could extend that flight and descend slower. So my point is if you use descend via, you should get a better glide path from using that clearance.
Thank you.
And Ms. Bernal, because your question at the previous meeting intrigued me, I tried to school myself a little bit on this, and I had exactly the same sort of first reaction, which was, I'm going from here to here, forgive my sophisticated PowerPoint here, from here to here, and I'm being told you have to be at this place, and this place. Well, in my mind's eye, I'm thinking like that. And then my impression as I tried to understand the concept or the purpose better, to your point, Mr. Martin, is the more identifiable points we have between these two places, in fact, the more likely it is that we will have a nice, clean, steady glide descent rather than, that's the thinking. I see that folks in the audience shaking their heads. Folks, shake all you like, and I appreciate the fact that it doesn't, I'm just trying to understand what the FAA's point of view is. I'm not saying I agree with it. Is that, do I have the concept right, that the more points between point A and point B that you highlight, the more likely it is somebody can be on a glide, as opposed to make up their own judgments about where they want to ratchet their way? If I've got it wrong, please say so that we all end up with a good, clear understanding of this issue.
The procedure is designed also around the capability of the aircraft. And so for descend via clearance, the pilot is not necessarily descending the aircraft to the next altitude. The aircraft navigation kicks in and it helps fly the airplane on that. So getting the descend via gives you the opportunity to utilize that technology, which again should result in that optimal profile descent. If you assign them an altitude, now it's upon the pilot to select that altitude and maneuver that aircraft to that. And that would not be considered as optimal because of the design of the procedure is to reach that optimal state. And if you have that human intervention, you most likely would not get it, or you certainly wouldn't get it as consistently.
Thank you. Then the other issue that was a follow-up, please, Mr. Leopold.
Thank you, Chair. Just to understand the windows, if there's slightly larger windows to help with the OPD, is that more helpful or a tighter window more helpful?
So the window is generated through the process in order to capture the fleet mix and the capabilities of the technology. So for air traffic, if the window is 5,000 feet, understand we have to protect 7,000, right? 1,000 feet below and 1,000 feet below. So from our standpoint, exact altitude is best for us, minimizing the amount of space we have to protect. So the window is really driven around the technology of the aircraft and the fleet mix and what they can fly. But it certainly lends the question in cases where you have very large windows, what can and can be studied to see whether or not to narrow them. It certainly would affect certain airplanes as to whether they could stay on an optimal descent if you were to raise the window or not. But again, that's through a process that we could study that and look for that.
Well, I appreciate that because, trying to understand, I think our goal, as I understand it from the explanation that's been described here, the closer we can have to that glide path, the quieter that will be. And if you have to create a window big enough to make sure that everybody can get into that glide path, that would be to all of our benefits.
And if I may, and not to contradict you, but I think there is somewhat of a perception that there's a optimal glide path. Even the same aircraft coming in heavier, coming in with different wind or atmospheric conditions will fly a different slope. And I just want to be, part of the window is there because even the same airplane won't fly
Sure.
that at the same time. So there's not one particular route or glide path. You're going to end up with a window of some sort is what I'm suggesting.
Thank you.
So, through the Chair, just to clarify, will the fixing of the Class B airspace help with that stair-stepping? It seems that that's what, and that we're talking about on this also.
Again, the Class B issue is one where Class B is a area where we restrict access to all operators, and we also are required to provide separation as well as other services in a particular way while you're in there. So part of the way the system's designed, as these high-performance aircraft come into a congested area, it is our intent to design it so that they get into that Class B and then we protect them within it. So in this particular case where they are coming in it and then leaving, coming back in it, that's an additional risk that we want to eliminate. So what we do, hence the design that we're working on to correct, is issue an altitude that allow them to stay at an altitude that keeps them into that Class B once they've entered. So again, once we issue that altitude, they're no longer gliding on the optimal profile descent. They're going to go to that altitude at different stages at different points. So some aircraft may very well have been given that altitude, but they appear to be gliding, at the same path they were, where others come right down and you see them perhaps, at 10,000 feet even before Epic, and then they're powered up and flying level. So we're hoping to redesign the Class B to get out of the need to issue that interim altitude and hence take them off the procedure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Lewis. Colleagues, that takes us to 1D, the question of technical expertise and connection with the TRACON has come up on a couple of occasions, and I've asked Mr. Martin if he'll help clarify a little bit. I think the concern has been that we make sure all of the right people are in the room, both to hear from the Select Committee and the public during the public hearing process, as well as making sure that we and the FAA staff who are advising us have access to the right technical information. I think this has, to some extent, just been a lack of understanding or communication about who's in the room and why they're here. And so I'm going to do the, poor choice of words, I'm going to do the 30,000-foot version and then ask Mr. Martin to bring it down a little closer to the ground, explain who's who and what's what. You will recall that Mr. Martin from the FAA and Mr. May from the FAA have been here and have been, I would say, the voice of the FAA in our conversations to date, both at the public meetings as well as at the working group meetings, which of course are open to the public as well. In addition, there have been two people typically seated by his side. One is Mindy Wright, who's here today. Ms. Wright, if you'll just raise your hand so we can all see you. There is no target on your back, not to worry. and Steve Carnes, who's the other gentleman who has been here with us at previous meetings, and who, by the way, were at the public hearings as we listened to the roughly 250 folks among the 1,400 who attended. And the understanding I have when I've pursued this a little bit on behalf of the Select Committee is Mr. Martin and Mr. May are essentially the voice of the FAA, so that the FAA can speak with one voice as much as it is humanly possible to do through two people. But that allows them to make sure that we're always covered. That being said, the folks who are, quote, actually, out in the field are connected to Ms. Wright and to Mr. Carnes, and they have that technical connection and understanding as well. That's why from time to time you'll see Mr. Carnes or Ms. Wright either pass a note or whisper in somebody's ear. That's why from time to time Mr. Martin or Mr. May will turn to them, but more to the point, they're here, they're taking this information, they're working our questions and our issues between meetings. So I wanted to establish that connection because I think having not said that, people were left to wonder, well, has anybody talked to the people who actually, make the airplanes go to the right places? Mr. Martin, that was my layperson's explanation of what I have to say is a very complicated org chart at the FAA. If you would like to clarify a little bit more who's who and what's what, I do think that would be a benefit not just to the committee but to the public.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. The things that I would add, because I do agree with how you described it. One is, in our role, Steve and myself, we are to, one, act as the FAA administrator in this region and be that person to represent the administrator. It's also a case where I was involved in one of my chief responsibilities is interaction with congressional representatives and their interests and concerns. Because this evolved through that, it was determined in the FAA that I should stay on and continue to be the person interacting. So just a little bit more to what you said, but just so you understand, it was important enough for the administrator that I stay on and continue with this work. For the technical piece of this, which is certainly more of a concern, something to understand is there are multiple facilities involved in these conversations. Things that the TRACON may or may not choose to do very much could affect both the tower at San Francisco.
And excuse the interruption. At the local airport, there is a tower.
Yes, sir.
The next level up in terms of airspace management is something called the TRACON, which stands for
Terminal Radar Approach Control.
Great. And then the next level up, there's still somebody else who's responsible for airspace.
Air Route Traffic Control Center.
So we've got centers, we've got TRACON, we've got tower. Is that the Reader's
correct.
Digest condensed version of?
Yes.
Got it. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I thought
No,
that was important to the understanding of the conversation.
And so if you view it as above that, you have a director that is responsible for all of those facilities. The director's technical staff is led by Mindy Wright. And so Mindy and Steve Carnes represent the director from the technical standpoint, and the importance of them being here is, depending on the questions or the issues to be researched, they're the ones that either have that technical expertise in-house to perform that analysis, or and if they have it, they use it. If they have to farm that out, they're the ones that understand how to farm it out to who in order to get that technical expertise. I also want to make sure you understand that Mindy's group also houses all of the environmental specialists and all of the procedures people who make it happen. So, you know, a TRACON or a center may design the airspace or procedure, but once they want it to happen, it's really Mindy's organization that puts it on the right paper, coordinates it throughout the agency, ensures that it gets the priority that it needs, and so forth. So I hope some of this explanation clarified the roles and responsibilities, but I certainly want to reassure you that the right people are here.
Mr. Leopold.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the explanation. I know in some of our previous meetings before we began the Select Committee process that there was questions or concerns or the need to talk to the air traffic controllers and their union. And I'm wondering, do they need to be part of this as well? Because there's negotiation that has to go on in order to come up with a flight procedure that is both good for the FAA's goals and for the community's goals.
So, you know, if I may presume to jump ahead and you make a recommendation, I certainly believe it would be the FAA's responsibility to follow our negotiated agreements and work through any process that we have in order to achieve the outcome that we're looking for. As far as, in particular, and you bring up the union, I mean, I can't speak, I certainly don't speak for them, and I certainly don't have an opinion as to whether you feel you need to speak to them or not. It's your choice, and it's certainly their choice in how to respond to that.
Well, I appreciate that, and I would never think to, I would not presume for you to speak for the union. But I'm wondering whether it might be worthwhile for us to at least reach out to them, because if there's a negotiation that has to go, if your agreement requires negotiation with them over these procedures, it might be in the Select Committee's interest, not the responsibility of the FAA administration, to have the air traffic controllers at least be aware of what's going on here.
Okay. Comments from others?
Yes.
Mr. Waldeck?
Good evening, Mr. Martin, Mr. May, Ms. Wright. I want to follow up on that just a little bit and just ask a simple chain of command question. The FAA is establishing routes and methodologies and so forth, and the ATC group is ultimately challenged with taking an airplane and getting it to the airfield, right? Okay, so are there established FAA procedures that they're enjoined to follow? Or how much latitude do they have in terms of rerouting and changing out of established process, you know, to accomplish their goal of getting the airplane on the ground?
And I apologize if I don't answer the right question. Maybe I'll just answer the one I want to, but let me try.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out how much latitude they have.
We certainly have a process on how to start, create, and implement a procedure. So we have established processes on that. You also ask about the flexibility. You know, just to kind of pat ourselves on the back, I find controllers to be, you know, pretty amazing people, and I think presented a challenge. I think they live up to it time and again for me. So they have flexibility around being creative and being able to design the airspace in which they work. I find very few challenges that they fail to meet. Now with that, again, there are various rules, I'll call them, that they have to follow. The procedures have to be separated appropriately. The procedures have to follow, the laws of physics, so to speak. There's things that certain turn radiuses that you can use, certain climb rates you can use. So there's a myriad of rules that go into shaping exactly how creative they can be. But so it's a combination of all of that. Taking the creativity of the technical experts, applying the rules that we have to, and then following the process in order to make the change.
That helps, thank you. Okay. And now I want to get to the second piece of that.
Okay.
I want to take a case in point. The history shows us that at one point, northern arrivals from the north were typically routed either around the bay to the west or along the bay to the east. And we've seen over a several year span how the majority of those flights have moved to the west as opposed to down the bay. And I don't know if that's I don't know how that happened, and I kind of had the suspicion it might be just easier for the ATC folks to route them repeatedly over one area as opposed to trying to divide it up. And I don't know if you could comment on that or not.
We have taken some looks at this, and we know that that's a concern. I don't think I would characterize it that this shift has occurred because it's easier. Maybe there is some of that,
we
and
don't know.
That may or may not be the case, but I don't think that's the driving force. A couple of the things that have occurred is the turn that comes in over the bay and turns in is in airplane terms a very tight turn onto the final, and the ability to stabilize is not, I'm not saying it's unsafe, I'm just saying it's not as safe as a longer final. And so I think, again, over time, there was a preference out there in the system to utilize the longer fly-in. I think what supplemented perhaps that feeling is we have a lot more airplanes coming in from the east than we do coming in over Surfer.
And Mr. Martin and Mr. Waldeck, this is under the category of other. No, it's fine. The agendized item is to have a little conversation about technical expertise and TRACON, and the question certainly goes to the sort of who do we need to be talking to about that particular issue. But in terms of fully fleshing it out, I think I'm going to ask that we wait till the next committee hearing, because that's when I'm hoping we make good progress on the rest of the agenda today, that we'll be able to take up those other solutions.
Happy with that.
That being said, I did hear from both the nature of your question, Mr. Waldeck, and certainly more directly from Mr. Leopold, that it might be a good time for us to reach out more formally to the controllers, if only to let them know that the process is here, so that if they've got something to say at this point, they are mindful of the fact that now's the time to say it. Mr. Martin, what I heard from you, and I'm going to do what I often do, which is put words into your mouth and see if they stay there, what I heard from you is, before we get to the implementation of some of these solutions, the controllers clearly need to be part of the conversation. Different folks will have different views about at what point or points in the conversation that might be most appropriate. To Mr. Leopold's point, I think just making sure that the controllers are sort of mindful of the fact that we're here, and that if they are aware of the conversation and want to weigh in, they do have that opportunity, as others have as well.
I think I need a point of clarification. I believe that if the committee would like to request that the National Air Traffic Controller Association come and talk with you, I have no opinion. If you're requesting controllers to come, you can make that request with me, but you need to understand I'm under a negotiated agreement, and that may or may not be possible for me, nor to be upfront, would we necessarily agree that that's in the best interest of the process.
And the good news from your standpoint then will be I actually wasn't thinking of either of those two things as a request. No, that's why we have the conversation, is to clarify. What I'm saying is, this this committee has benefited from input from a lot of different folks in a lot of different ways. From the 250-plus folks who spoke to us directly, from the 12 different noise groups, from the 2 professional consultants that have been hired by some of the cities involved, certainly from your input. I think at this point, just making sure that we don't go all the way through this exercise only to have folks in the controller's world say, hey, wait a minute, why didn't we know and why didn't anyone tell us, would be an appropriate gesture on our part. And then if they choose to weigh in somehow in the process, they can choose to weigh in somehow in the process. But I think that's kind of where we are. Okay? Colleagues, I think we have made our way through the follow-up to the prior Select Committee discussions 1A through D. And if so, I would very much like to move on to items 2. I do want to reference that a couple of our alternates have arrived since I made introductions earlier. Thank you to Mr. Otaki from the Menlo Park Council. Thank you to Mr. G from the Redwood City Council. I see you have the 2 sides staked out so that we're covered, we're balanced, and that'll take us on to the items under item number 2. We were in the midst of a conversation at our last meeting about the Surfer, Big Sur, back and forth. Is there a logical place to pick that up at this point, Mr. Martin? When last we met, we, I think, had been told, and I think it was by Mr. May, if I remember correctly, Mr. May, that there was a discussion underway about something called Davy J, that Davy J was a procedure that would move back to what I'm going to call the general vicinity of Big Sur, but you were taking pains to point out to us that it would not be identical with the Big Sur that preceded it. Do I have a fair recollection of where we left things?
That's correct.
Okay. So what else would it be helpful to share today? And I feel sure there are going to be questions on this subject.
All right. So again, much as you set it up, we're here to talk about the idea around the Surfer and where it could move, and share with you some information around that. And then we wanted to get into feasibility number 6 area as well.
And before you do, let me just look to the City of Palo Alto staff, and thank you again, Mr. Lee, for being with us. Can we get this on our screens here at our places? Sometimes the resolution isn't quite what we need, but sometimes it's helpful to have it.
Well, ours is off, so we have to turn it on.
Here comes some technical assistance. Yeah.
Here's power. Does it have a green light? There's, there it is.
And your red light's not on.
What did you press?
Green, yeah, the power button,
Give it a shot.
Where's the power button?
Right here, it's at the far right. It's the little black button, far right, next to the red button, red light. Red light.
There we go.
It's always the on-off button that's the important one. You're welcome.
Coming there.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Please proceed.
All right, next slide, please.
Actually, could you go back to the previous one now that we're focused,
I'm
so we
sorry.
can focus
This,
for just a
this was
moment?
just the 2 topics that you have in number 2. sir.
Got it. Thank
Okay.
you.
Next slide. And we're going to talk about the first one. Next slide, please. So this kind of takes you back. I think we showed you this last time. This is what we did was take the tracks that overflew the Surfer in July of 2015. We took the tracks that overflew Big Sur in 2014 and averaged the altitude at these points. And we're just showing you what those average altitudes look like. There's both what we call mean sea level, which is, of course, an aviation term for altitude, but we also tried to measure that against the AGL as well. Okay? So next slide. So for this, again, we were trying to term this the Davy J, just so we don't get confused with Big Sur. We're not going back to the Big Sur. We're talking about a notional design, Davy J. Not sure how we called that, but hopefully that's as good a name as we could come up with right now. We do already believe that, given the math that we've ran, we do expect the Davy J would be an average altitude higher than the Surfer, as you know today, but it's not likely to be as high as the Big Sur was. So somewhere in that gap between the two is what we've estimated it to be, okay?
And the reason for that is?
The optimized glide path that we're shooting for.
Thank you.
Okay. It is just something to note that if we were to move back today, if we were to move to a Davy J today, it would not be contained in the Class B, similar to the way the Surfer is. However, the change to the Class B that we're currently pursuing, that change would encompass it. So in a way, if we were to move to the Davy J, we're a little ahead of the game of getting the Class B changed in order to capture it. Any questions on that?
Obviously.
Yeah.
Ms. Lewis?
Well, the obvious question is, what is the altitude range?
Oh, okay. Can you back up for me, Cash, please? So the altitudes, as you can see there, are about 1,000 feet apart. If you look at the bottom altitudes, 11,370, 12,300. So right in somewhere in that range.
But, excuse me, but you said that it will be higher than Surfer is now, but not as high as Big Sur used to be. So what's that delta?
What is the altitude?
Well, if it was 1,000, is it 500 feet lower than what Big Sur used to be? Or is it 200 or 800?
It's somewhere between that 1,000. We don't know. We don't know whether it's 200 or 800. I understand the question. We don't know for sure.
Mr. Martin, forgive me, I want to make sure that the question is understood. There are a lot of different ways to reference this. You had referenced it in terms of being higher than Surfer is currently, but not as high as Big Sur was previously, yes?
Correct.
And we're looking, I think, back and forth, and that allows us to tell what the height differential, what the altitude differentials are between Surfer and Big Sur. But what Ms. Lewis is asking, if I understood the question correctly, was what's the differential between where Big Sur was before and where Davy J would be now? Did I get that right, Ms. Lewis?
Yes, sir.
And if the answer is didn't calculate it that way and we can bring it to you at the next meeting? Or didn't calculate it that way, can't bring it to you at the next meeting for some reason, and then, this would be the time to...
Okay.
It's
So,
impossible to calculate.
and I think there's a couple of points to clarify, so thank you for your question. Again, these are taking all the tracks for a month and averaging them. So I want to be sure that the posted altitudes, the windows, if you want to call them that, again, are not single altitudes. This is the average over a month's period of time. So what we're saying is the windows that would be created on the Davy J should result in the average of a month's data somewhere above 11,370, but we do not think it will average out above 12,300. The exact data is something that would have to be determined through the process of identifying where is it, what's the distance from the fixes, the final, measuring that all out, getting the fleet involved, and finding out what the optimal profile descent is. And that, that's a process that will take months to go through to figure out what that exact altitude is.
Before I go to other members of the committee, and thank you for your patience with me teasing this issue out a little bit more. Here's the issue, Mr. Martin, as it sets itself up, I think, for me, but also probably for others. So we've got a bunch of folks who live over on the left screen. They have heard folks from the right screen say, just move it back. It didn't bother anybody before. You're saying, committee, recommend what you like. We could do something called Davy J. It would be on roughly the same path, but it would be lower than it used to be before. And we understand that it will be higher than Surfer, but we're trying to figure out, to answer the question for the people who are anxious about moving it back, they're all asking themselves, all right, it's going to be different than it was before. How much lower are the airplanes going to be when they come over my house this time than they were before? And I think we can draw some inferences from this information, but back to Ms. Lewis's question, you know, you got a bunch of folks out there who are saying, before you start talking about moving Surfer back to Big Sur, which you're now going to call Davy J, and you're going to make lower than Big Sur was, we'd like to know how much lower than Big Sur it's going to be. I just think that's a thing we got to confront here in this conversation. So if I can just ask you if there are ways to tease that out a little bit more, again, not necessarily today, but as we go through this process, I think for the folks who live on the left screen, they don't really care about a comparison to the folks on the right screen. And the folks on the right screen don't care as long as it gets moved to the left screen. The folks on the left screen are saying, how will this compare with the experience I used to have? Because that's the one thing they know that they can measure against as they think about the potential impact. And it's something I think these 12 elected officials are going to need to know before we cast votes about, we want to recommend this or we want to recommend that. Sorry, colleagues, I hope that helped rather than confuse the conversation. But let's just go down this way, start with Ms. Bernal.
I think what you said did help, and it was part of what I was going to say. But what I'm also hearing, and I'd like to know a couple of things. One thing, a lot of the people that I end up representing live on the summit. So there's the ground, the elevation issue. Am I hearing that although it will be not as high as Big Sur, will the fact that you will be in a better descent profile ameliorate the falling in altitude, the lowering in altitude? And, well, I'll let you answer that first.
I mean, the intent of the Davy J would be into the optimal profile descent, of which we believe to be the quieter than the stair-stepping case. And that, so the procedure would be built in that way to achieve that goal.
Okay, I've got to pull out "we believe."
Okay?
How are we going to know that what you believe is going to work?
I'm trying to think how to answer that. I guess you're trying to say to me, if we were to move it back, are the people under the Davy J going to believe they're better off that day than they were today?
Exactly.
Okay. I have no way to help you answer that. I have some data here to show you what the noise differences are suggested to be. They're going to now see what the people on the right see today. Okay? So what you're asking me is, what is the annoyance factor, of which I don't have an annoyance factor. I can show you where the track is and the altitude and the sound volume that's modeled. But whether or not people become annoyed by that, I don't know.
So you are suggesting that we move forward with the slides so you can show us this?
Well, maybe if I may, hold your question, let me get a little further, and then
Sure,
let's come
sure.
back to that and see if I can give you better information.
The other part of my question was, on this slide, it's a July reading. Why was it July? Is that a high period of flight, low period of flight? I mean, or just a random choice or a specific reason?
It was just a random, we had to go back to 14 to find the Big Sur tracks to run them. We obviously, rather than run a July and a January, we thought we'd at least try and run the 2 Julys. But
Okay.
there was no specific purpose for that.
The follow-up question is, what does July look like compared to, where is it in the volume of, I understand there are higher volumes of flights throughout the year.
I will double check. I don't believe San Francisco's volume has a significant
Fluctuation.
fluctuation through the year, but I'll validate that. But
Thank you.
I'll take a check on that.
Mr. Adiego? No. Mr. Waldeck?
In our last meeting, you guys, the FAA had presented a series of slides, and slides number 10, 11, and 18 appeared to show that DVG altitudes could be at or below surfer. And I'm looking at some analysis of what was presented at that meeting by some of our constituent groups, and it appears that the range of DVJ altitudes could in fact be rather significantly lower than surfer. Yet here today, what you've suggested is that it will be higher. And I'm wondering if there's an error here someplace or what. I don't know the answer to that question, but between what was presented and what has been analyzed, there's a discrepancy. Could you go back and just take a look
We'll
at it?
definitely go back and take a look at it. I mean, we will definitely go back and take a look and clarify any discrepancy.
Okay, because right now it looks like from the data that showed in the last meeting, it looks like it will be lower than surfer, not higher. And that's an even greater concern at this point.
Well, if I may leave this with you today, our position is the altitudes will be higher than the surfer. Okay? I will go back and figure out how to clarify those slides that apparently were misleading.
That's fair.
So I will correct that, but I do want you to know today our estimation is it will be higher than the surfer.
Okay, thank you. And we've talked about the other business, about the 2011 agreement, but it sounds like the congressional agreement with the FAA has been set aside now in favor of the new methodology. Is that correct? Is that a different way of saying that we're no longer honoring the 5,000 feet limit?
I think that's fair to say, yes.
Thank you.
And who's next? Anyone on this side? Questions on this side? Supervisor McPherson?
Well, some of these might have already been somewhat answered, and maybe you need to show a little more. But being a supervisor from Santa Cruz County, I just want to say maybe my opinion on this, the way that Davy J looks like it's going to cause some problems in the Summit, Palo Alto, East Palo Alto area, the way it's proposed. That's just the way I'm reading it now, because it seems to be lower and would cause more concern there. And our charge is not to move this from one place to another, and so I'm just concerned about that, and I think that others have expressed that as well.
Any response from FAA on that point?
I think the next few slides
All right.
will speak to that to some degree.
Why don't we let you make your way through the next few slides then before I take comments or questions again? But before we do that, I'm trying to read body language in the back of the room, and I'm getting the impression that both Mr. Martin and our select committee members would do well to speak up a little bit. Is there a struggle in the back? Yeah, okay, all right. Maybe the one thing we get unanimous agreement on, so we can ask everybody to speak, including the chair, to speak up and into the microphone. That would be helpful. Thank you, Mr. Martin.
Sure.
If I might, Mr. Chair, is there a way to increase the volume on all the mics from your control panel? That might solve a problem
Yeah,
unilaterally.
we have to, I'll put in a request to our IT department, they have to come and do it at the back end.
Cash, if you could move forward for me. Again, please. So, in modeling the noise, not that you care, but our policy is really around choosing 60 random days. We take into account terrain. We do believe about 50% of the traffic from Surfer is vectored off of that arrival. And to model that, and we'll get into this with a slide, you had to make an assumption of where that vectoring occurred, and we'll have a chance to talk about that on a future slide. And then we modeled the notional Davy J at Surfer altitudes, and then again, we modeled them at the average Big Sur altitudes, and that's what I wanted to show you today. Okay. Move forward, please. So this is going to be one of those you have to stare at, and I'm probably going to flip back and forth a little bit here, Cash, if you can stay with me on this. So the legend on the right is DNL ranges, as you can see, about 5 dB differences, 20 to 25, and then there's a greater than 45. Noting that greater than 45 is always going to be at the very top of the slide. The other ranges are what you're going to see mostly through the area from Epic and into Menlo. So when we modeled the Surfer tracks, so we took current Surfer tracks, modeled them. This is the DNL, the current Surfer tracks produced. So again, I think the legend speaks for itself. Is there any questions on the meaning of the colors or any understanding of what the DNL numbers are for each color or anything like that?
I would walk through it briskly, but just
Okay.
so, you know.
So if you notice that when the aircraft come over Epic, you can see that it turns green, meaning that the DNL is right around in the average of 30 to 35 DNL. And then just to the right of Skunk on that slide, you can see where it then picks up into the 35 to 40 DNL, and it continues that rate pretty much down until you get, there's a little bit south of Eddy, but you can see where you get into the 40 to 45 DNL as you move further north. The other thing that I will just note to you on this is if you can look at the dark blue that's out over Los Gatos and, can't read, Aptos, is that, am I correct? Okay, Aptos. You know, I just point to that dark blue because, of course, if you kind of look at where that's at now, the next slide, of course, it's going to move to the west. So it's just kind of a reference point for you as far as, you know, what the shift might look like. So I think it's probably going to be easiest to maybe kind of go back and forth just a couple of times here for you to see, and then, you know, please stop me if you have any questions, okay? So on the next slide, we modeled the Davy J with the Big Sur altitudes. So as you can see, the dark blue moved west of Aptos, west of Los Gatos. You again have right around the 30 to 35 DNL coming over Santa Cruz. Right around the Skunk intersection, it begins to pick up to the 35 to 40 DNL, and then it leads up between, is that Boulder, sorry. I thought there was a D in there. Boulder and Eddy, you begin to see the 40 DNL begin and then it leads on up into the Menlo area. Okay? You'll also note, of course, that talk a little bit about why you see the tracks off to the west of the Davy J. The reason that you see the green and orange areas with the lighter blue in between, this is that part I hope I can help you capture. We had to assign routes to simulate the vectoring. So while that appears like you would have very distinct DNL with quieter areas in between, in fact, that area would be what was all vectored. So it would probably smooth out a little, but if at any time during the vectoring you saw a concentration on one of those particular routes, then you can see where it would move up from the 30 to 35 DNL into the 40, I'm sorry, I apologize. You can see where if there was concentration, and I'll pick that San Gregorio area. Gregorio? I'm sorry, I can't see this far. The San Gregorio area, you can see where you went from the 30 to 35 DNL into the 35 to 40 if you had concentration on that vectoring. But in most cases, what we see is the vectoring is fairly smoothed out west, or not smoothed out, but it's very random west. It's not so much on these defined tracks. Did I lose anybody there? Or just wanted to be sure that was kind of understood. Okay, so again, this is at the Davy, this is the notional Davy J, the DNL that the modeling shows under it at altitude, at the average altitudes for Big Sur. Okay? So if you want to say a different scenario, and if you could move to the next slide, this is again running it at the surfer altitudes, okay? So this is if you moved, if you actually designed the Davy J at surfer altitudes, this is what it would look like. So would you pull back for me one slide? So if you can look probably almost the middle of the screen at that boulder fix, you can see there's a little bit of the 40 to 45 north of that area, and then it kind of breaks down a little bit to 35 to 40, and then it kind of starts back up in yellow. And then also note that the 35 to 40 that extends pretty much down the Davy J route, which is the white line, and then next to it you see kind of a finger of orange as well. I'm going to move forward, and what you'll see is you lower those altitudes, those kind of areas will stretch further south. So could you move forward one? So now you see, the yellow filling in there north of Boulder. That vector line just off of that you see continues in that 40 to 45 DNL at those altitudes. Okay? I'm just giving you a chance to absorb. That was a lot of information and a lot of contours to take in, so I didn't want to jump ahead.
Is there more to the presentation?
Yes.
Then
Okay.
I'd say
Okay.
keep
All right.
moving.
Okay. If you could move forward. So now I don't want to lose you here. Before, what you saw was the modeled DNL by modeling the tracks and producing a day-night average for you, and that was those contours. This is a totally different slide. Now what I asked for was to model to show what the difference is in those noise levels if you were to model the Davy J, and I guess I would say this is kind of that worst case scenario. We modeled Davy J at surfer altitude. So this is kind of worst case scenario if you were to reroute aircraft from the surfer to Davy J at the current surfer altitudes. This is what we show to be the modeled change in noise. So if you look again around that Aptos area, you'll see that the change would result in roughly an 8 to 10 dB drop in that area. Surrounding that, you would see a 5 to 7 dB drop going further north and further to the east. Moving over more along the Davy J, we believe that there would be a small area there along the coast that would experience somewhere between a 5 and 7 degree dB increase. And then the dark blue shows a 2 to 4 dB increase as you move further north. Again, to explain those specific dark blue tracks, those were assigned routes for the modeling. So we don't anticipate you would see long stretches of the 2 to 4 dB next to long stretches of no change or less than 1. That would probably be more averaged out because that's the vectoring area. So as the aircraft were more randomly vectored, you would see that kind of fill in. So roughly the area being vectored is going to be, of course, 4 dB or less increase over there to the west.
Ms. Bernald, I know you have a question, as do others. Do you want to pop your question in real quickly here?
Real quick one. Is this what it would look like if this were to fix in place?
If this were to fix, if what were to fix,
Meaning,
You're doing Davy J along the surfer route. Is that fixed in place?
No, this is the Davy J on the Big Sur route.
This is
So
on the
this
Big
is the
Sur route.
change, this would be a change going from the Surfer
Okay.
to the Davy J, which is around the Big Sur route.
Are we going to see the surfer route with the Davy J? Is that the next slide? So this is not a fix in place?
no,
That's-
I don't think this is, no, this was if you changed from today, changed from the surfer to the Davy J, what is the change in dB across this area?
Got it.
So essentially, to the right of the surfer track, the yellow and the green are negative numbers. You would see a drop in the DNL level of 10 dB or less.
I just wanted to clarify because we've got surfer and Davy J there, and I wanted to make sure that it was not a fix in place.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
let me
Sorry.
just take a quick count. How many folks do we have who have questions at this point? 1, 2, hold on, everybody. And on this side, 3, 4. And how many more slides do we have?
I think now's a great time to do questions because I'm not sure how many times we're going to need it back.
Yeah, that's what
Back up.
I'm thinking. It might be good to Mr. Leopold?
Is there a slide that has Davy J with the Big Sur altitudes? I mean, or do we only have this worst, you labeled this as the worst case, you labeled this as the worst case scenario. So is there a better case scenario?
It- The difference is, you're going to have to take it home and study it. I mean, there's just not going to be. That's why I was going with this. The maximum level of increase by moving it from the surfer to the Davy J shows you a small area of 7 or less dB increase, a majority in the 4 dB or less range, so that you have some feel for, I could have come in, unfortunately, possibly, and shown you that you were going from 40 DNL to 60 DNL. You know, what I'm trying to just show you here is what the modeling shows is the worst-case scenario is you're really in around 7 dB or less throughout the area.
So it's probably, I understand now what you meant by a worst-case scenario is you think this is as bad as it could get. It may not be this bad,
Correct.
but that's okay, because that's important. If you mind-
Excuse the interruption. It, not only, it may not be this bad, but it, quote, wouldn't be this bad because you've told us that you're going to have higher altitudes than current Surfer. We couldn't nail down how much lower than Big Sur they were, but we did get a clarification that the notional Davy J would be at a higher altitude than the current Surfer. Did I hear that correctly earlier?
And I think that's what I'm going for here. Showing you this, we're saying it should be better than this. Mm-hmm. If I show you this and say it should be better than this, and I show you that and say it's not going to be that good, I just thought that would be more confusing. I'm kind of giving you a reference point to say it should be better than this, and so that you know, again, so you have some reference. Are we talking 20 dB? Are we talking 10 dB? Are we talking 5 dB? This is what I wanted to show you is what we feel is the worst case, and it should be better than this.
Got it. Colleagues, I'm going to make the judgment that even though I don't know what the slides ahead have in store for us, this is a time when we should entertain some comments and questions, because it seems pretty clear to me everybody's engaged by this slide. So I'm going to go to Mr. Leopold because we're mid-question. Then I'm going to start at the end with Mr. Lane and work this way all the way to the end of the dais. Mr. Leopold.
Thank you, Chair. There's a lot to digest here. The first thing is, just for confirmation purposes, your modeling and the way the FAA does noise is different than the way most of us look at noise, right? I don't mean to be sarcastic. I mean, I'm trying to understand, excuse me, you have previously stated that on your readings, we don't have a noise problem, right? And we have probably 1,400 people who the modeling that you did for the Metroplex showed that there wasn't going to be a noise problem, and, now we have a problem. That's why we're here. So I just wanted to validate that the way in which the FAA does noise and the way in which it can sometimes be different. So trying to digest this material is trying to understand exactly what's there. Okay. The question about how you vectored the flights, you made some choices, and it seems like there's 4 vectors here. Is there a reason we didn't do 10 vectoring, or?
The model doesn't allow for that many.
Okay,
yes.
so 4 is the maximum of the model.
I believe that you can model 6 routes.
Okay.
So I think we did, the route we were looking for, the Davy J, and then I believe we added 4 additional ones, yes.
And it might be helpful for us, for comparison's sakes, to model what the old Big Sur route was, right? Because that would, we've heard lots of testimony from some from people who were under Big Sur who had no problems with noise, and now that they're not under Big Sur, they're to the west of Big Sur, to the west of Surfer, that they now have more noise problems than they did when they were right under it. We heard that testimony. So to the extent that we had some comparison data, being able to look at that modeling data from what our old route gives us some idea of an apples-to-apples comparison, because I appreciate that this is the worst-case scenario, but I'm sure that there are people up here and maybe people out there who are very concerned about what this shows. And it would be nice to sort of to try to take a look at what that past, what this modeling data would have showed for the past Big Sur route, in addition to the notational Davy J and the existing Surfer route. Is it possible?
I think we can model the Big Sur tracks over and show you the previous DNL slides. That's what you're
Yeah.
interested in. Okay. And I don't think there's any issue with doing that. I think we can do that. I don't want this slide to be lost on you. As much as you might tell me the people under the Big Sur are going to remember how it is, and if it goes back to that, they're going to be okay, they're going to feel the change from today, not 2 years ago. And that's why I presented this slide. I'm not telling you it's good or bad. I'm not suggesting to you this leads you to a decision. But for me, this is what our modeling suggests they're going to sense, that this is the change that just occurred to them. And so I will certainly work on that modeling that you asked for, and I think we can have that for you shortly.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that there is going to be changes. And, clearly those who live under Surfer, they know what the changes have been over the last year and a half. And in part, that's one of the reasons why we're here, is to try to alleviate that problem. I think that's all I'll ask for now, but it would be really helpful to get that modeling under the Big Sur.
Okay.
Ms. Bernal? Mr. Addiego? Excuse me, Mr. Lane, I apologize. I said I was going to start at that end and promptly stayed at this end, so my apologies. Back to you, Mr. Lane.
Thank you. Ms. Bernald said something that really stood out for me, that it was kind of like what didn't get said in a way, and I want to kind of pursue that a little bit, which is the, quote, fix in place, that concept. In other words, what is it about, whatever notional Davy J, as you call it, is not just moving a line. It's a whole procedure and line, I assume. Is that right?
Correct.
Right. So whatever you're proposing there, is there some way that a Davy J-like change could occur on where the current path is, the Surfer path? Or is that in fact what Surfer is now?
Let me see if I'm following you. The change in the Davy J, I think, to make it higher than the Surfer, right, is mathematical. It's not a change in procedure design with a higher descent or a greater descent profile. So we're not changing the way we optimize it. We're saying if we were to optimize a profile on that route, the math would allow it to be higher than the Surfer route. You follow me there? So I think your question was essentially, could you make the Surfer higher? Right. Is that where you were going?
Yeah. I mean, whatever ideas and mathematical calculations you're using to create this Davy J at a higher level, can you do that same process on the Surfer route?
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to explain.
Yeah.
We
Okay.
did the same process, but because of the math of where that line is and the distances, it calculates out to be higher altitude.
Okay.
But more to your point, that's again what we hope to gain out of this is an understanding of what is better for these communities through your voice, and then pursue that. So depending on what your recommendation is, that's what we'll pursue. Okay?
Thank you.
Councilmember Hindi.
I have nothing.
No? Thank you. Mr. Waldeck, Councilmember?
Yes, sir. Two questions. Does this modeling take into account any differences in concentration from the time, I don't know what your base, I got to chew this mic, don't I?
There you go. Thank you.
Okay. I need a longer cord is what I need. The question is, does your modeling here take into account the differences in concentrations of airplanes between the 2013 timeframe, 2015 timeframe? we believe that a fairly significant increase in traffic has occurred, and consequently the DNL would go up over time because of that concentration. Does this modeling take that into account? And in particular, what you're projecting?
I don't think it does. I don't, as you described it, I don't think we took that into account, no.
Okay, so this is based on what year's data then?
I'm sorry, sir. could
What
you-
year was this data based on? You're modeling it over based on some amount of traffic, so I'm curious what it was based on.
Could you, Cash, could you back up just a couple of slides? Whoop.
One more forward, perfect.
Okay, so this is based on fairly recent data then, is that right? Okay, that's the first question.
Okay.
And the second one is, are you going to model, this model that you're projecting, I presume, assumes the same kind of traffic that you are currently experiencing on Surfer, is that true?
Yes.
So it's an apples and apples comparison that way?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I want to know, thank you.
Okay.
Now, Mr. Adiego.
Yeah, I'm sorry, the question did develop. Just when you think you're getting it, then you have to kind of start over. So Surfer is an OPD currently,
Yes.
and the Davy J you're proposing is an OPD.
Yes.
And there's glide slope, there's percentages, there's distance. So why can't the higher numbers be applied to Surfer? If 4,000 is the waypoint in Menlo? I guess I'm not understanding the basics at this point.
I think the basics are the distance you're flying, the further away, the higher you're able to get, correct? And what the math is telling us is that track back out over Big Sur is further over in distance, and therefore you could come in, we were kind of measuring this, as you could see, about at the coast. So where it comes in at those points on the coast on that chart, it just showed you that we believed we would end up coming in a little higher because of that angle.
Okay.
It's not...
It's the distance then that allows you to do that.
Yeah, if I can say this correctly, we've taken the same math for the Surfer and applied it to the notional Davy J. Mm-hmm. The question that I think a lot of you have is there different math, different glide angle, steeper descent, and all of that? I mean, that is still a relevant conversation and maybe end up being a recommendation.
Can I just ask a clarification
Let me
question?
stay with Ms. Bernal if I can, but before I get to Mr. Leopold, thank you.
And it may be the same clarification, I don't know, John. You have proposed this move to Davy J, and I'm sure...
Let me interrupt for just a
Yes.
moment. I don't believe they have
okay.
proposed the move to Davy
We
J.
have
Before that
feasibility
headline goes
study.
out.
Yes.
So,
We
thank you.
have a feasibility study that says we should be looking at Davy J. Yes. I would imagine with all the flack that you've been getting throughout the United States, 24 metroplexes and all this, you didn't just throw this out at us because you felt like it at this point. So, do you believe that Davy J is the optimal solution?
I believe that given the FAA's process, metrics, standards, our environmental policies and requirements, we could do either. We are specifically here to understand from the local communities, one of the major criticisms we do find around, ask the local communities what's best for them. And that's where we're at. As you could kind of see in that DNL level, you're not up near any significant metric triggers of those standards that we currently have. So what we found is we do believe it's feasible to go back come back in over the Big Sur track. But my answer is, we believe it's feasible to do either. We're still trying to understand from the local communities what's better.
I'll have my own interpretation of that in a moment or two. Mr. Leopold? No, I think, okay. Mr. Pine, you've been very patient, and I think you've got some questions at this point, and I'll keep going down the line.
I'll just do one now, because I think it's a good time to ask it. And it really follows up on a question I asked the last time around is, everyone in the room appreciates that the current SURFR, it's not working. So we're looking for alternatives. So the alternative that has been the focus of the feasibility study and the focus of the discussion today is, using the OPD over the Big Sur track, which we're calling the Davy J. So we're saying, is this going to, is this better? And, are there other potential tracks with the OPD next-gen descent, that are worthy of consideration? And we've limited our discussion to 2 tracks. We all realize that OPD and next-gen have to be applied to any track that is flown, but we know we have one with real-life experience that's causing great hardship, and then we have this notional Davy J, which we're doing our best through these great slides to understand. But that's the extent of our analysis. And I guess I'm following up on the question of last time is, how did we decide that was the only choice? Because that got into the feasibility study. You didn't come up with another one. You didn't come up with something in between the two. So somehow there was a decision made to just focus on this Davy J. And then the second question is it possible to look at other tracks, or is that just getting us into a endless analysis where there's a great, we do have a deadline to make decisions?
So if I may, the suggestion of moving it back to the Big Sur track, and Big Sur, I think, were both, those were recommendations we received through the congressional offices in our meetings with them. So our focus on those was specifically because that was what our ask was.
Okay.
I do understand the, endless analysis to, keep moving at 1 radial degree until we get there. I'm not sure for us, very honestly, we're just, with our standards, we're not sure what we're aiming for. The tracks
Folks,
are not
please.
Changing the noise levels.
Hang on just a second. Folks,
without putting...
hang on, Mr. Martin. Hang on.
I'm sorry.
We're not doing that. Okay? We're not. If you've got a strongly held difference of opinion, please feel free to share it appropriately. But the only way we're ever going to get to consensus, which is what the call is for, is if we have a process that lets everybody be heard, no matter how much we may disagree. So we're not doing that. Please, Mr. Martin, go ahead.
So again, as we've talked, I don't think we're only offering these 2 options, but I just caution you that, we just can't keep coming back and forth either. If there's a way to figure out through your valuable input where it's better to bring these airplanes, I hope we can get focused in on that alternative as quickly as possible.
Right, which, the challenge would be if we had the ability to look at 10 or 12 tracks, it's always going to be adverse, presumably, to the people under that track. Maybe there's a track that has the least, what was the word we used, irritability, but
I think I called it I think I called it TPA, total persons aggravated. Okay.
So we might find such a track, but folks under that track will be under that track. And that seems to create a fundamental challenge.
I want to keep going down this side. Thank you. I've got some follow-up, if my colleagues will bear with me for a minute, that tie into where Mr. Pine is. Mr. Martin and Mr. May and Ms. Wright, I followed up the last time when Mr. Pine raised this because I had some similar questions in mind. And I want to go back to an earlier comment with respect to the response to Ms. Bernal. There's been a tension in these conversations from day one because I think there's a significant sector of the community and some members of the Select Committee as well who, in a better world, would say, FAA, this is your area of expertise. Would you please come forward with a set of recommendations? For better or worse, that's not how this process has been set up. The members of Congress have been in touch with the FAA. The members of Congress have said, here are all the recommendations we've received and a few more to boot, and would you please take a look at it and come back and tell us what you think is feasible? You've done that. We've been asked then to make recommendations to the members of Congress from that list of feasible items. We have concluded sort of inexorably that we needed to look beyond just the list of feasible items because there were some items that could be feasible, might be feasible, seemed like low-hanging fruit, so we've gone beyond that. But as much as we might like it to be otherwise, in the imperfect world in which we're working, the FAA has said, actually, we're waiting to talk to your members of Congress about your recommendations, Select Committee. And that puts us in a tough spot because we're trying to identify recommendations we are prepared to make without the FAA being in a position, it feels, to give us recommendations to make to them. So we've got a little bit of a chicken and egg problem there. All of that being said, Ms. Bernal, I think if we can go back to the slide, and if I can ask Mr. Elliott to get us back to the slide with the noise fingers, as I call them, here's what I conclude from the slide, Mr. Martin. I conclude that you're telling us, committee, recommend whatever you like, but please feel informed as you make your recommendation that if you move something from one place to another, there'll be some improvement for folks in one place, and there'll be some aggravation for folks in another place. Is that a fair summary?
Can't judge their aggravation, but I can tell you they would experience some increases in dB.
Fair enough. There will be an improvement in an objective measurement in terms of noise in one place, and there will be a impairment or an increase in noise levels in another place. And you're just trying to make sure that before we send you a recommendation, we understand that. And I don't mean this to be as flip as it sounds. I'm guessing you're delighted that we get to make that recommendation to you rather than the other way around based on your recent history. And that was why I said, Ms. Bernal, I had my own interpretation of that. And I've sort of understood when we all assembled here as a committee that, in a perfect world, we would be evaluating somebody else's set of recommendations, but it's not quite set up that way, and we're going to struggle through November the 15th, 16th, whatever it is, to come up with recommendations understanding that. That's why these hearings are as iterative as they are in terms of conversation. Now, to get us back to where Mr. Pine was a minute ago, because that's how the recommendations surfaced, meaning scores of recommendations surfaced, and the members of Congress said, please take a look at the scores of recommendations and tell us what you think is feasible. I heard you earlier say, one of the recommendations that got a lot of attention was, can't you just move it back to Big Sur? Fair enough. That's what you heard. That's what you responded to. Supervisor Pine has a point of view which I think is an important one and which I, to some extent, share. I don't know what the conclusion is, but I do think it would be a shame to go through all of this only to have somebody show up 6 months from now and say, if only you had looked at this perfect track, wouldn't that have been better? The world is not limited to just these two procedures, the old one and the current one. So there's a little tension here because I understand that we don't have the time, the energy, or the resources to go look at every possible approach on the planet. On the other hand, I think we would not be doing our job if we didn't stop and ask ourselves, hey, are we missing something here? So what I'd like to add to the conversational mix going forward is what I'm going to now officially name the Pine Simidian, hey, are we missing something here question. And I don't want to panic people, which I think it did the last time. It doesn't mean we're abandoning this conversation. It just means we're trying to make sure that we do our due diligence. And, you know, part of the challenge in this part of the state is the topography. We heard that loud and clear from people during the course of the public hearings. I want you to know we heard that. Lower is not, higher is not higher if it turns out you're higher over higher land. Okay, fair enough. Let's think about that and ask ourselves what impact does that have. But I would like us to sort of keep that in the conversational mix going forward and, you know, just brainstorm it a little bit, because I feel, as I say, that we wouldn't be doing our due diligence and being responsible. And maybe the answer is, you know what, there's a reason we chose the current one and there's a reason we chose the last one, and those really are the two best options all along the coast. But I'd like to sort of know that with a little more certainty than I feel I do today as an individual member of the committee. So thank you for your patience with that. And you know, now back to this side. Anything else, Ms. Lewis, on notional Davy J, please. And you can pull that microphone out and it will not break, I promise. There you go.
Okay, so could we go back a couple of slides? I want to see the altitude over the new Davy J. No, forward. The next one. So we can see the notational Davy J coming up, and it gets to those little ovals that are the yellow, which are, I think those are the peaks. If we had an elevational chart to show the peaks of the highest mountains, it's my understanding that those are not very populated areas, even though that would be a higher noise or a lower out from the ground, not the sea level altitude, to the height of the plane. Am I correct in assuming that?
I think you are, yes.
So even though it looks like, oh my goodness, it's making it, the plane is lower, I think that those are kind of the peaks of the mountain, so it's not going to affect that many residents. And then going to your four fingers of noise levels of death there. So my question is, you say that the blue shows an increase of 2 to 4 dBl DNL, and that's compared to what the old Big Sur track would have been, or what they are currently experiencing, what residents under that notational Davy J is experiencing today.
This changes from today to if you were to put the planes we modeled here over the Davy J.
Okay, so today they're not having really any noise. Well, they have the noise, the off noise from the surfer, correct? The
yes, some
vectoring.
of them, yes.
Uh-huh. So that's not compared to what they had been experiencing with the old higher altitude descent on the Big Sur route.
That's correct.
Okay.
And I think that's the ask, I'm sorry, I'm not pointing at the right person, but I think that was the ask to model the Big Sur traffic as one of those previous slides so that you would see what it was.
So we would need to have that comparison. And then can you kind of give me a sense of how loud is a decibel, right? I mean, how will I be affected with a 1 decibel increase or a 2 decibel increase in my awareness?
I think what I've read is typically your ear would not discern something less than 3 dB. That's what I've read.
You would not discern something less than 3 dB,
Correct.
but you would discern something more than 3 dB.
Excuse me, I think you meant you would not discern a change if there was an increase of
I'm
less than 3
sorry, I'm
dB.
sorry. Thank you for clarifying that. Yes, thank you.
In
So-
other words, if there was a certain noise level and it went up by 2 dB, 2.5 dB, that would not typically be, quote, discernible, but above 3 dB, an increase would be discernible. Is that?
So let's
Yes.
put it in perspective here. The blue fingers of death are 2 to 4 dB.
Yes?
A, dB, A.
dB in
In
DNL,
DNL.
yes. I understand, and let me try, because this is, a little more difficult of science than I can fully explain, but it's one of the chief criticisms we have.
Okay.
So, a couple of points. The critical element in that chart is DNL, because it's day-night average. So it's averaging the noise produced by the aircraft over a 24-hour period, averaged.
Yes, which I'm hoping that we will change in the future, okay?
Yeah, understood.
Yes.
Very much so. So it's important to understand when it's a 2 to 4 dB increase in DNL, okay, that doesn't mean each aircraft is only 2 to 4 dB noisier. It could be more than that, correct? It's just averaged over the 24-hour period. So I mean, I just didn't want to make it seem insignificant, because it is a 24-hour average.
We would be affected by that. Okay. I'm fine.
Mr. Bodorf?
Thank you. If you can indulge me with a few comments, I promise I will get to a question. Okay. I'm trying to highlight everything that's going on, and I want to commend Commissioner Leopold for the comment about the chart, because what's in the crowd out here is, on this issue, Big Sur and Surfer people, and everybody is afraid of what's going to happen, afraid of what we're going to do. And so that comment about getting that chart, about comparing Big Sur versus that, even though there is no more Big Sur, and I'm trying not to use that language anymore, and I know we want to move from that, it's really important in this discussion, because people under Big Sur don't really care about what the noise difference is from Davy J to Surfer. They need that comparison. So just wanted to get that out there. The other thing is I'm trying to follow about the math and the geometry and the points and this altitude thing. And there was a question that's been brought up, and I'm not sure if this is a closed issue, but I know that if there are fixed objects that we can't address, then I understand that. When we get to military space and things like that are just absolutely not negotiable. But Mayor Lewis brought up a point earlier on about the Menlo Waypoint, which for me, in my mind, I just rationalized that there was absolutely any increase in the Menlo Waypoint, it makes everything better along the way back. Is that a fair statement? If there was an increase in the Menlo Waypoint.
When you say increase, what does
In the height and the altitude.
Thank you.
Increase in the altitude, I'm sorry. Layman's
From 4 to
terms.
5,000.
That's
No,
okay.
no. From 4,000 to 4,001 foot. If mathematically there was any increase in the Menlo, does it help everything back along the way?
Any increase in Menlo would likely result in a higher altitude down the track. And the reason I'm cautioning that response is, remember, there's some windows. So even if we raised Menlo, the average altitude on Surfer essentially mathematically might not go up. You follow what I'm saying?
I do.
So I'm not saying I'm not saying that's a bad thing or it's not worth considering and pursuing. I'm saying it's hard for me to say for sure everything's going to go up. For every 100 feet you raise Menlo, you get 1,000 feet at the other end. I don't think mathematically that's accurate.
And thank you for that, and I'm not asking that.
Okay.
What I am here is trying to pay attention from the beginning of the process, and the word that comes to light for me is, it's what I ask for, okay, that you're going to respond to. And so we can speculate all day long about everything, but in my mind, what I would ask is, and I go with the Cimidian Pine proposal also, which in my mind, the reason I believe we went to SURFR was it was an efficiency thing that put everybody on GPS, that brought everybody more in alignment. And maybe this panel is not so concerned about efficiency, and that's why maybe the Cimidian Pine route, which is not even on the discussion here, might be a better route. So we may ask for that, but I'm realizing that it's all about our ask. So my ask is, you know, I want to somewhere along the point here, whether it goes to 5,000, whether it's 4,100, 4,200, I think that somewhere before this is over, I may be asking for an increase in Menlo, which might raise all these numbers all the way across the line. And I just want, and you kind of answered it and say it may. I don't know if it's possible. When Mayor Lewis asked earlier, you didn't say, well, no, we cannot raise Menlo. I haven't heard that. And if I'm wrong in that, you know, you can correct me and say, no, it's impossible to raise Menlo. You can say,
and that will be part of our other solutions discussion next week.
yeah, I'm just saying, but for me with SURFR, I'm just following the mathematical line, whether it's SURFR, Davy J, and you already answered it, and that's okay, is that it could result in some elevation increases all the way back to Epic.
And again, it's the Pine Cimidian question. In case it goes sour, I want to give Mr. Pine the lead on this. All right.
As long as it doesn't have any Santa Cruz representation on it, I'm fine with the whole program. But that,
Chair should be in the
and I'm just trying to follow that, you know, if we don't ask the right questions or the right solution, and I think that a couple of good suggestions came up here, I just want to make sure that we're considering all those possibilities.
And I'm glad that you are. And, you know, just so we both feel we're all trying to work for a common good here, we're being asked to consider a higher altitude at Menlo, and we're being asked to consider to move it. So for us, depending on where you put it, will determine the altitude. Do you follow what I'm saying? So for us, we're kind of running around the bush. Okay, do you want it higher there, or do you want it over there? And then let's figure out what that would be. I mean, so I think where you're going, I'm glad that you're going there. I just wanted you to know, from me, it's trying to figure out where you want it and what altitude you want it at, and that's where, you know, we seem to be continuing the conversation on Menlo.
Thank you for your flexibility.
Supervisor McPherson, anything else at this point? I believe there really are some more slides on this item, yes?
Well, I had just one or two more questions.
Please.
As I look at this slide, you know, this looks like a horror movie slide. But the reason why we have these fingers is because there's a limit to the number of routes that we have, and if it really mimicked real life, there would be blues and purples, you know, dispersed without these kind of concentrations. Is that correct?
Yes.
You know, because I think that's a scary picture, by the way. So
you should see the three I took out.
For clarity's sakes, the notational Davy J, is it coming in at the same angle as SURFR, or is it slightly different?
Same angle.
Same angle. The last thing I'll say is, you know, you're making the case that in this slide, in the worst case scenario, that should the path be moved west, that people will experience a change in sound, and we should be aware of that. And I think that I think you were very good to point out that the colors are in some ways not exactly as the rest of us would perceive it. That 24-hour average is very difficult, because if the plane roars over your house at 70 decibels at 6:30 in the morning, then you don't get another one at 70 decibels for another 20 minutes, you're still awake, and you don't get to go back to sleep. So that's the limits of this. but I think the case has been made to us, and this maybe is more of a comment than it is a question, is that the FAA in some ways created this problem because there was not very, there was minimal public notification about the move over to Surfer, and now we have concerns about moving it back to its historic routes, where under the historic route, we didn't have any problem. So now that there might be an increase in sound, I can just tell you that the constituents that I have who've complained about the sound, there have been others who have criticized them by saying, well, you'll just get used to it and it'll go away. And there are probably lots of people here, there are hundreds of people who file these noise complaints and have been for a year and a half, who it isn't going away, it's staying. To move it back to its historic route, would people notice that there's a change because it's taken so long for the FAA to whatever way we get to the end of this process? People will hear noise differently than they hear today. I think that's yes, but if the historic levels of sound are there, I think there's a case that you can make that did not create the same kind of problems that we clearly have right now under the Surfer route. And I just want to contextualize that for maybe the FAA and our colleagues, is that the problems that we have now are real, and people move to certain places because of the relative quiet nature of those places, and there should be some acknowledgement of that in terms of the choices we make and which route we're gonna recommend to you, whether it be any of these two or any of the others. I can tell you that most people would just like the planes to go up the coast and not go over the land at all, and then we would consider the problem solved. So we're limited by that. So the Pine-Cimidian route maybe won't be over the water all the way up, but that would be the best route because it would definitely bother nobody.
And that's the Pine-Cimidian question, not a route, lest anyone think we proposed a route. So just to be clear. Anything
right,
else, Mr. Leopold?
No.
And then, Mr. Pine, back to you.
If I could take a second to ask some questions about vectoring. So today with in the old days, the old Big Sur, there was substantial vectoring off of that path, if I understand correctly.
Very similar percentage, yes.
So the amount of vectoring isn't, it's still 50%, I think I heard you portray.
Yes.
But have the impacts of vectoring changed? And maybe this is a question for my fellow panelists. When we had vectoring off of old Big Sur, took the planes and over a variety of territories, and those planes are continuing to vector going over those same territories, is that impact worse now? I mean, in other words, vectoring off of the OPD next-gen descent versus vectoring over old days Big Sur descent, are those flight paths and impacts pretty much the same? I can see you have a quizzical look on your face. The question becomes how much are we concerned about vectoring? Because we have 50% of the flights always have been vectored. And I take it your goal ultimately is to, with time-based navigation, the whole next-gen idea is to reduce vectoring, which I guess could be good or bad depending on where you live.
So I think the vectoring is caused essentially for two reasons. One is, you have an aircraft from the north, you have an aircraft from the south, and frequently you have one from the west, and they meet somewhere. And in fact, the ones from the north, once they reach the airport, they're on a vector. So they're not even on a procedure anymore. They're being vectored from that point for south. So the vectoring is because you have to put one in front of the other, and they're coming from three different directions, and you have to make a call of which one's going to go first, Sometimes it's the faster one, sometimes it's the bigger one, depending on what works best for the traffic flow. So some of the vectoring is caused by that. When we get into number 6 here, we're going to talk about how we handle that today and
Okay.
what are possible ways to deal with that. And I don't know if that defers your question,
Why don't we
but
come back to it later?
I was going to say, I think we're going to get to that shortly,
Okay.
or at least I hope it shortly, if we can make our way through the rest of the Sur for Big Sur presentation. And I think, I'm guessing most of us have concluded we're not going to fully resolve the Sur for the Big Sur conversation today, that there's to be continued again on this item. So let's try and wrap up the presentation, take any last questions or comments for today on Sur for Big Sur, so that we at least get to feasibility group 6 today, given the fact we've got a hard stop at 4. Okay?
sorry.
So, no worries. If we could go ahead and proceed with the slides, and let's try and get all the way to the end, and then take
Okay.
a last round of comments or questions if there are any at that point.
I think you got the summary for the gist, if we can keep going. So we did some of the questions around monitoring and modeling. So what we did was go back and look at the environmental assessment for the surfer change and just give you a comparison chart regarding the modeling that the airport did, the monitoring, I'm sorry, the airport did following the implementation. And so if you can go on to the next slide. This is simply, so we took the values in the environmental assessment and converted them to CNEL. CNEL is California's version of DNL. Hopefully that's understandable. But since San Francisco's report was in CNEL, we simply converted so that there was somewhat of a comparison. So the draft environmental assessment, what it does is it takes a year in the implementation cycle, and then you have to model 5 years ahead. So because the modeling was done in 14, you had to then model 15 or 19. You have to do a 5-year look ahead. Okay. So all this is showing you is essentially what the modeling results showed at these particular locations that San Francisco eventually monitored, and then they took their monitoring. I don't want to make this this is absolutely comparable, definitive, because they took 16 days of monitoring, and the modeling, of course, takes 60 days and all of this. But it just to kind of show you some results around monitoring against what the model showed originally, and that's the significance of the slide.
All right.
All right.
So
and
that-
then with that, that is the wrap up for today, at least, on the number 2 area, unless, of course, you have questions.
All right. Colleagues, as I said, what I'd like to do is see if we can wrap up the Sur for Big Sur conversation for today, bring it back again next week with some follow-up. We've asked for some additional considerations, some additional maps, but let me just, one last time around the Beltway here. Councilmember Lane.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand what this last slide is about, because this is not, I mean, I think I got it, but I just want to say it out loud to make sure. So you're saying that, so the 2 green columns are what beforehand you projected would happen under Surfer.
Correct.
And then this is, in fact, using the same kind of measuring, that comparing apples to apples, then the yellow is what, in fact, has been the on-the-ground result of that, of Surfer. Those are actual.
Yes, if the differentiation that the yellow there was San Francisco Airport's monitoring and calculation of CNEL, the 2 green columns were the FAA's calculation of CNEL that was contained in the environmental assessment used for the Surfer move, the move to Surfer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Coming down the row again, Mr. Leopold?
And I would just point out that I think this shows the difficulty, if not failure, of the FAA's noise monitoring standards, because I know people at these addresses, right? And I've been at their house, and I've heard how loud the planes are, and they write me emails at 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning saying, another day where a giant plane came by. And if you look at the detailed information, which I think we got at some point of the San Francisco noise monitoring, they will show you 70 decibels at 6 or 6:30 in the morning. That isn't just like estimated. That's the San Francisco airport noise monitoring, and that just, again, it's amortized over the entire day, and so it comes off as low, but the experience that people have is not low. It's significant.
And thank you for bringing that up, because I want to be sure I'm clear. This wasn't a demonstration that it's low. This was just a demonstration that they did the monitoring and calculated the CNL and wanted to show you what the modeling. This was more of a comparison, modeling versus monitoring, and this was not a display of any credit to the values, okay?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So I didn't. It's a constant theme that I brought up, is that the way in which the FAA noise monitor is not the experience that we as local government officials use or that the public expects. It's unique to your agency, and that's where some of the frustration has been. But I take your point.
Headed down this way. Any other comments or questions on this issue? Then if we can roll into the presentation on what was feasibility group 6, which had to do with aircraft setup and sequencing, which I think we understand cuts across a lot of different conversations, but I think is an important one.
So feasibility section 6 is around the fact that we are, the conversations around vectoring. I know there's concerns around the holding that we do, and hopefully trying to help you understand when I talk about sequencing, we have to ensure the airplane arrives on the final approach course safely, obviously, but at a repetition that allows for the efficiency needs of the airport. So the demand drives that. So whether they start at 4:30 in the morning or end at 2:30 in the evening, our job is to get them to that final approach course safely and as efficiently as possible. So there are techniques that we use. Now, for the most part, the techniques that we use are the way that control is set up is you have you have a line of controllers. One controller is working you when you're down by Los Angeles. They pass you to a controller up here near the peninsula. That person hands you to someone that's working you as you descend toward the peninsula. You have another one that works you while you're over the peninsula, and then perhaps you have one that works you when you're mid-peninsula and further north. So one controller passes you to the next. So because we don't schedule the airplanes, they get to head this way anytime that they choose to schedule. So what we do to handle that is each controller is then assigned a specific distance. For us, distance equals time. Specific distance to pass each subsequent arrival to San Francisco to the next controller. We call that miles in trail. So one controller will put 20 miles in trail between each subsequent San Francisco arrival, and they'll pass them to the next controller. That controller probably reduces it to 10 miles in trail and gives it perhaps to the TRACON controller over the peninsula. So we use that miles in trail as a flow, if you want to call it, as to what rate is going. In this particular case with the Bodega and the Oceanic and the Surfer, obviously, all three controllers around that last controller are giving them certain spacing based on the volume that's coming in, because that last person is the one putting all three flows together. Everybody kind of with me so far? So where Area 6 is, and something that was brought up, is if you flowed better, you could reduce the vectoring and you could reduce the holding and so forth that you see. And so the most significant technology advancement that we are working toward to help us do that is what we call time-based flow management. And so today, as I described, each of those three controllers around the last one is giving them aircraft at a distance apart, irrespective of whether or not the other has one. You follow me? Because the three don't see each other. The three are separate people. What time-based metering is able to do is, computer-wise, is actually able to take into account all of the aircraft coming to San Francisco, and now, based on time, is able to then say, I'm going to assign aircraft a time to be at a certain fix, and by doing that, I can ensure that the people around them, as long as they deliver them in a way that they can meet that time, they don't have to vector or hold airplanes, because we can now use speed control further from the airport. We might, instead of 20 miles in trail, if the volume's heavy, the time would actually, by time, space them out maybe 23 or 27 miles apart, because you needed more distance there. So this is a decision support tool that we're developing, and a path forward to try and generate that smoother flow. The second piece of this is, of course, if you can help deliver the aircraft coming up, landing on the Surfer, then at a rate in which there is a spot for them, then the ability to leave them on that optimal profile descent is going to be much greater, and therefore you're achieving all of the results that you're looking for, which is the idle descent, hopefully quieter, less annoying, and you're also not having to vector or hold the aircraft as often as you do today. So let me kind of take a breath there, see whether there's any questions or concerns about how we do it today, or what time-based metering is. Okay, can we move ahead there, Cash? So a lot of this I just explained to you. The current operations, you know, the ability of the controller to use speed is, of course, limited to the size of the area in which they're responsible for. So, and of course, aircraft don't slow like a car. They slow quite much less. So the smaller your area, the less achievement you can get in using speed control. And certainly down in TRACON airspace and in the areas that we're most concerned with here, speed control is not going to assist you very much as far as getting them to slow down behind one another. You're going to end up using vectors most of the time.
Excuse me, before you go forward. And Mr. Martin, forgive me, because you and I have had this question and answer many times, but it seems to me the time is right again to ask. And so if planes are going to vector, why can't they vector over the ocean rather than over the coast or the peninsula? That's not it's not meant to be a rhetorical question or a flip question. It's like there's, you know, the analogy I use, we all have our own, is we have planes from all over the country and the world who seem to be racing so that they can then be stuck in a pattern over the coast and the peninsula. And if they're going to be stuck, there seems to me there are two different possibilities, speaking as the uninformed layman that I am. One possibility is that they just get here a little bit slower and a little bit later, and you've suggested that that's not as easy as it sounds. And the other possibility is that if they're going to vector, that they could vector out in the coast rather than after they've hit the coastline or over the peninsula. So what's the potential, let me phrase it in a positive way, what's the potential for some improvement by one of those two means?
So first of all, it's most important to understand all of that is happening. The lines that form to come into these major airports start hundreds of miles from here. So when I say they put them in trail, that can extend clearly as far as Denver. If you get to fly up here as often as I do, you sit out on the tarmac and wait 15 to 20 minutes before you take off for LA, because you in effect are in that line from here all the way to LA, waiting to find space to get in there. So first of all, it's just important to understand that's already occurring. We are doing things further and further from the airport depending on the volume. If you are headed to New York, you are being sequenced, spaced, vectored, and slowed over Iowa City. So there's an example of where we do this halfway across the country depending on the flows of the need of the arrival airport. So the second thing and that's what this tries to address, if you have an aircraft coming down from Seattle, arriving over the Bodega, and you have an aircraft coming up from Los Angeles on the Surfer, the only person that knows who's going first is that last controller. The system doesn't provide any information to any previous controller that says, hey, there's someone up north. If you'll slow down for them, if you'll slow down, they'll get there a little more ahead of you and it will go smoothly. That's what this system tries to address. It can now take into account everyone coming and then help communicate information out to the controllers along the way, that there's actually some action that they could take that would affect that confliction, if you want to call it that, or that tie at the fix later on down the line. And so let me see if that kind of tried to address some of your concerns.
I think if I overheard my colleague correctly, I mean, one of the points is that when you're over Iowa City, you're a little higher up on the way to New York than you are when you're coming in over the coast or on the peninsula. And I heard the response, and I think I got it, which was when you got folks coming from multiple locations, only the sort of the last controller in line knows how to manage that. But what I think I heard you say is that in terms of sequencing, we're expecting progress based on the technology improvements over the course of the coming months and years. Is that a fair statement?
I think that's a fair, but I want to add to, it starts over Iowa City and continues all the way until you land in New York. It's not that it only happens over Iowa City. It happens from there all the way to New York. You're being vectored and sequenced.
All right. So let me ask my question again, and I'm going to just ask it again and see if there's a shorter or simpler answer, which is if folks are going to vector as a way to kill time, why can't they do it 5 miles off the coast?
The folks that are working you 5 miles off the coast are doing that in order to provide you at a rate that the next controller can handle. So if it's 10 miles in trail, 15 miles in trail, 20 miles in trail, they're being vectored to reach that delay, okay, or that spacing. They're doing their part. The controller at the peninsula, over the peninsula where the concerns are here, is still getting planes from 3 different people who can't see what the other one is doing. So the last person in line is the last person to sequence you to the runway.
And so who is that? So I've got centers, I've got TRACON, I've got tower. So who's in charge of me if I'm flying an airplane 5 miles off the coast headed towards Capitola?
Everyone we're getting ready to talk about is within the TRACON in a different sector, in different airspace that a separate controller is looking at.
And so are there a series of controllers within the TRACON? Is that what you're
Yes.
saying? Okay. And am I understanding correctly that they don't have the ability to communicate to each other just how backed up traffic is?
So let's, if we may, let's walk through that example. So yes, we have the ability to say it's going to get very busy with the traffic coming in to land on the left side. Again, we can get into splitting the airport, but let's not get that complicated. They're coming in and they need to land on the left side on the runway 28. When that happens, in very simple terms, that last controller says to his 3 friends, don't give them to me any sooner than every 10 miles in trail, because I'm going to be getting them from everybody. And those 3 friends, they all turn around to their friends and say, hey, I'm taking one from you and one from her. You all have to give them to me 20 miles in trail. Now, fortunately, that doesn't just keep doubling clear across the United States, but the point is, so that's what's occurring. So each controller is spacing the aircraft, but in the end, the last person is still getting 3 airplanes, irregardless of how many each of those 3 people continue to send, but they have to send them at a spacing that's determined based on the amount of traffic coming.
And I apologize if I seem dense, and I'm going to give this up in a minute, but why can't the last controller in line say, I'm looking out my window, and they're all stacked up. Back them up even more, everybody. Because I can tell you, so I happen to be I live 2 miles from here. I'm a Peninsula resident. And, you know, if you talk to my neighbors and constituents, they're going to tell you, you don't need to be a controller. You can just look up in the sky and see that people are stacked up over our region. And, you know, they're trying to understand if they're going to be stacked up, why do they have to be stacked up here? Why can't somebody just say, hey, traffic's backed up, find a way to slow them down, either by greater distances, so everybody slows down along the path, understanding that those are many and complex paths, or by vectoring out over the ocean. Why can't the last guy, I mean, what I just heard was all these people are speaking to each other, but what I didn't hear was why the last guy in line doesn't have the ability to send the word back up the chain, hey, everybody, we're stacked up, let's slow it down.
And I apologize, I'm not explaining it well enough. They are slowing it down when they tell each of the 3 around them to put more distance between them. So in my example, they said, each of you give them to me 10 miles apart. If they know they're getting busier, they go back and say, increase that to 15 miles apart. So this is just, I want to stick a little bit to the vectoring piece and the reasons you're seeing the vectoring in the areas that we're concerned about. And the example I was trying to give you is to understand there is vectoring, spacing, slowing, delaying going on all the way into the Bay Area for San Francisco. But even though that's happening, it's not alleviating it here, because at some point, the final controller has to maneuver each of you behind one another on the final. And that maneuvering is, in some ways, what's causing the vectoring. In others, it's because there's not a time flow to that. So it's, you know, rather than getting one from one and then one from the other, if they get one from each of them and then they get another one from each of them, it causes the vectoring and possibly holding if it gets to be to that level.
Well, for today, I'm riding a dead horse, so I'm going to dismount. but I'm going to follow up on this one with you because I still don't feel like I've got a real understanding of why, if all of this can be done, it cannot simply be done more and better. And as I said, the impression people are left with, even if it's by simply looking up in the sky, is that everyone is racing to circle over a parking lot that can't take them. And I think the test I use, and my colleagues on the Board of Supervisors tease me, is, so if a normal person walks up to me at sidewalk office hours and says, for God's sakes, why are they all circling overhead? Why can't they circle somewhere else? I need to be able to answer that question. And right now, I don't feel like I can give them a clear answer because I don't feel I have a clear answer that I understand. So I think I'll ask if we can put this in the to be continued category, and maybe I'll work it out, to the point where you and I can communicate directly on it. Okay, thanks. Others, thank you, colleagues. I apologize. That was a more belabored set of exchanges than I had hoped. I apologize for taking all that airtime.
You were hoping for a better outcome.
I was hoping for a better outcome. So, anything else on this issue of setup and sequencing? More slides?
Yes.
Okay, marching ahead then.
So again, the tool, we actually call it the terminal sequencing and spacing tool. And as you can see, the various flows that in this example that are coming in, you have one coming from the left bottom corner, you see the one coming from above it, and you see the one coming from the right side. This is what's happening in these airplanes that you see stacking up and circling and so forth. Okay? So again, long before this happened, the only reason you see one coming from the lower left corner is because the controller before that, this one, and the controller before that, and the controller before that, and the controller before that was involved in sequencing this stream of airplanes to this point, holding them, turning them, slowing them, whatever they needed to do to ensure that only one of them shows up in that space at this time, and the next one doesn't get there until that pre-described time. Okay? So what the tool does is, again, now the tool, much as we can't, the tool can look at everyone coming to San Francisco and allow you to now pick locations. So if you picked the location that first orange yellow aircraft was at, you could time this so that aircraft only flew over that fix perhaps every minute. And get into that minute to 90 seconds, you're getting to about the 3 miles we require for landing, okay? So if you time everyone that's coming in there and all the planes so that only one can cross each minute or so, you can then back up those times, much as I think you're seeking, so that the changes that are necessary as far as slowing them or vectoring them can be occurring, but it's occurring with the common goal to get one airplane at that point every minute or so that you need one in order to maintain the efficiency.
Next slide.
And do we have one?
That's it.
This is for the other conversation.
Colleagues, anything else today on the improved aircraft setup and sequencing between facilities? Just to provide a little bit of optimism, I will remind you this is on the list of things that are feasible. So notwithstanding the back and forth that we had, that's the good news. Yes, Ms. Lewis.
Well, it sounds really good to have time-based flow metering to sequence everybody so that they are in a smooth approach and over the GPS. Doesn't that increase the numbers of planes flying over a smaller group of homes on a daily basis? And if you're using the 3-mile approach every minute and 90 seconds over a 24-hour period, or the most planes are from like 6 to midnight or something, but I think there are more. I haven't done the math, but it does seem like a huge amount of planes that would then be able to fly that Davy J route or the Surfer route or whatever GPS approach route that you have, and without any relief for these residents living under those flight paths. That's my first observation, and maybe you could elaborate on that. My second question then would be, to me, that would be unacceptable, even though it might be more efficient, and it would reduce vectoring. The problem with vectoring is that it's vectoring over our communities, but it does create some dispersion. And so if they could vector not over our communities, but then reduce the numbers of flights over the GPS route, or some other kind of dispersion technique, so that it's not just one single approach into the airport.
So one of the situations we find ourselves in is if it's dispersed, then we're asked to reduce the number of people impacted. If it's a tight line, we're asked to disperse it and share the noise across the thing. So I understand your observation, and the ability to determine what is best is one we're trying to pursue, and I think that's the reason you're seeing so much effort on our part to find a better way to engage with communities to figure out which way do they want to go. The second piece to just share with you is part of this time basing is to allow the delay that you would get with vectoring to be absorbed further away. I mean, in effect, if it's good over Iowa City, it's got to be good over Denver coming to San Francisco. So it is, in effect, trying to push back whatever that delay tactic is further away from the airport. So in this particular case, you wouldn't see aircraft on each one of these routes a minute apart because they have to blend. So again, yes, you may see some more concentration, but there would also possibly be, some bigger gaps as you were getting airplanes from the other routes coming in at the same time.
Let me ask, to what extent, understanding, and then I want to go to Mr. Leupold, understanding that if you have fewer planes vectoring, then that means that there are more on the path, and that raises concerns for the folks who are on the path. If they're not vectoring, then presumably they're not engaging in the noisiest of activities, and they're supposed to be on their optimized descent profile, and that's supposed to be a quieter track, as I recall. So is there a way to net that out and say, and therefore, I mean, much of our work here at the Select Committee and much of what we've talked about has been about, let's try and find a way to get rid of the vectoring, which is a significant concern. So understanding that, if you get rid of the vectoring, I mean, to what extent does the OPD end up minimizing the adverse consequences of eliminating the vectoring and focusing the channel of traffic?
I would have to take that one. I'm not sure. I'd have to sit down and try and figure out how to calculate that. I'm just not sure how to do that tonight.
Just to respond, I think even with the OPD or the, quieter glide path, if they're coming over your home a minute and a half apart, it's still visual pollution, it's still that there, and it's a small number of residents that are being affected by that. But if, like Mr. Martin says, that with the time-based flow metering system, it would not necessarily be that many flights over one track, because the airport couldn't handle then all of the rest of the funnels that are coming in. it's it's hard. It's a very complex thing, and
Mr. Leopold.
Maybe an easier question. What's the expectation on the timing of this system?
So the system is being used. It has been, under development, so this isn't something that's brand new or anything like that. It is a system that is unique in each location. The traffic and the amount of consistency that traffic experiences can affect. If you're timing to that last airplane, you can't take a totally random track, or your timing to get there is different. Therefore, you would never be able to calculate a sequence, if you follow me. So there is some uniqueness to each product. So the timing of this, again, is probably not near term. I think that this is something more in the longer term time frame, and something that we certainly see coming here, but we were looking for, is this something that you feel is important, and if so, you're placing some importance on it, and being supported by the congressional delegates can always influence waterfall and so forth.
Sure. So, when you say the longer time frame, that could be 5, 10 years? What would the...
I would say, this is that 2 to 3 year time frame.
All right. The other question I had about it is, getting back to my colleague's question, would a system like this be able to look out? So, the problem we have now is the last controller doesn't see what the other controllers see. So with a system like this, would it be able to calculate this out and then be able to take advantage of this space that doesn't have as much impact over people?
I think this is inevitable. If you want to maintain a transportation system, you're going to have to time base it, because the ability to continue to achieve the efficiency necessary and obviously take into account the impacts of, of this, you're going to have to time base it. It's greatly, even though we say sit there for 20 minutes, then you can take off, it's very inefficient. You just aren't efficient doing that, where getting you up in the air, knowing what you could get, how now that you're flying, we know you could get there by this time. Now, how much delay do we need to put into that in order to meet the rate at the airport is, an incredible efficiency gain. Then, you sitting there for 20 minutes, now you get in line, you're fourth in line, there's just a great inefficiency in that. And so I do think this is a way that we'll move forward on.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else on this set of feasibility group 6? All right. If not, here's what I would like to suggest, colleagues, is that we take the next 15 minutes and try and have a brief discussion about all 3 of the items under longer term issues. And the reason, and we can certainly continue them and other items to the next meeting. And I think earlier I said next week when I meant next meeting, so I don't want to confuse anybody about that. But these are all items that have been surfaced by members of the committee about that need to be put on a list, or that committee members feel might need to be put on a list for longer term issues that we want to identify, even though we're not going to tackle them here. We're not going to revisit the issue of how the FAA measures noise, and we're not going to do that between now and November the 16th, 17th. Military airspace, huge issue. The notion of an ongoing venue or forum has been raised previously. My expectation is that each of these would be a sentence or two or a paragraph or two in a final report with recommendations to the members of the House delegation who have impaneled us, but not much more than that, that we're, precisely because we're not going to try and sort all that out now. So if that's sort of where we all are, then good. This can be, as I say, a relatively brief. If somebody else wants to say, well, no, I think we, want to lay out, in 20 pages, 3 different models for an ongoing forum and venue, because, there's no end to what that could look like, or who could be in charge, or who could be constituents. I mean, I think we can lay out a few possibilities as examples, but again, my notion on these items was to just sort of put them in there, and I don't mean to dismiss them. Quite the opposite. I mean to say, by virtue of including them, we think these are such large, challenging, hairy issues that could be in one word, that we're going to need somebody else to tackle these after we put that. Mr. Martin, I saw that you do have some slides on these. So is there anything you want to?
Well, I just wanted to. I wasn't exactly sure how much you wanted to flesh out military airspace, but I wanted to present this slide to you, if I may. If you can
Please.
put down a few. So the point here is to show you in the red is the special use. We call it special use airspace. It's not all military, but it's special use. And the important thing is, as you see coming up from the south, you can see what we call corridors in between some of that special use. So when we design procedures and we leave the area, it's important to understand that we're confined between those special use airspaces. And so the ask here is really, if you find this slide helpful, we certainly submit it to the committee in your discussions around special use airspace. But it is significant out here, and it is something we route. We route around. Some of this is not necessarily all the way up to 45,000 or so, but much of this is routed around at all times. So if we build a procedure, we do not go through any of these areas, most of these areas.
Thank you. I think it is helpful just to see the scope and extent. And again, colleagues, my expectation would be that we would simply indicate in our report that during the course of our efforts, we discovered that military airspace, special use airspace, was, these are sort of legacy issues to some extent that, obviously some significant portion of it needs to be maintained for whatever set of reasons, but that at some point it would be nice if somebody would sort of sit down and say, are any of these artifacts that are no longer really essential, or where we might be able to find a little more give and take given the pressing needs of civilian aviation. That's about what is that? Yes, Mr. Rutherford, thank you.
Just for reference, because, I don't have anything to align it to, would it be possible to get a slide like that had the surfer route on it? Just so I could, because this means nothing to me about what I possibly do, and if I want to use the Pines Committee and proposal for an alternative route, I have no reference point here, so possible?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, we can put the surfer on there, and definitely, like I said, I wasn't exactly sure where we were going, so thank you for the feedback, and we'll add that to it.
Ms. Lewis.
Well, it does, for reference points, I think that they have denoted the San Francisco airport, right? There's a little red dot blue thing. And then I think if you go down about a half an inch on our screen, there it looks like that's the bay. Am I right? Monterey Bay, kind of carving in. So to me, it looks like the military airspace is some nautical air miles off of the coast. And along the coast, there is airspace that we can travel in, and that we do travel in quite frequently, that could be used for taking planes off. I guess it'd be nice to have the dimension in, air miles and maneuverability, because this is, it looks like it's quite constrained, but I don't think it's as constrained as we imagine it to be. And clearly, coming out the San Francisco gate, it's free. There's clearly a free path out there. So it would be nice to have a little bit more detail that we could see what kind of airspace we do have free use of.
All right. I'm gonna ask that we get that, but again, with the caveat that this is not going to be a subject we're going to be delving deeply into at this committee. So, Mr. Fine, Mr. Leopold, and Mr. Waldeck, is that your mic? Okay. Mr. Hindi, is that, no? Okay.
Just a quick question, because of the scale, it's hard to see, but is there some red right there where it says SFO? I assume that's Moffett. I mean, is there military airspace related to Moffett? I can't tell if there's a little red in there beside the S.
I'm going to say I just poked my pin there east of San Francisco and didn't erase it. I don't know what that little dot is. Yeah.
I guess the bigger question is, what impact does Moffett have? Presumably they get some superiority.
That's not anywhere near Moffett.
Okay.
Moffat's under the blue San Francisco emblem. Yeah, that's not Moffett.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Leopold.
I appreciate you giving us this map, and I think the suggestion of putting the Surfer route on there is useful, but I think it would be useful to put all the routes that we've talked about, Candle and Davy J and the night, what? Bodega. I mean, just so, because I imagine, if I'm correct, that you're threading the needle on different parts of this because of these airspaces. And so it'd just be good for us to just see that all, because we've looked at all those routes.
Understood.
The other area that it would just be good to have informationally, not for us to discuss, is I don't know, when you say special use airspace or military, I don't exactly know how many entities that covers. Is that just Department of Defense and one other, or is there multiple different folks? And is it possible just to get a list of who has those red blocks?
Yeah, yes, I'm sure we know who the controlling agencies are and using agencies are of those. I'm sure we have that,
Yeah,
definitely.
I
I
mean,
mean, you
email is
have
all-
NASA up here. Some of it's certainly military. I mean, it's a variety of people that use it. I would say most of it's probably controlled by some type of military unit.
Okay, thank you.
But we can get that.
Ms. Bernal.
Thank you. As someone who lives under the flight route that goes into Moffett, I was sort of surprised to hear that it's not military anymore, because I'm definitely getting military planes. Is there, and I'm also probably getting planes when anytime any high-level presidential type candidate or president himself comes in. Memorial Day, 4th of July, I'm getting planes who are going to be flying in. So they are, in some cases, military planes. So
Did you think I said they weren't military?
No.
Oh,
She
I'm
said
sorry.
it. No,
Okay,
no,
I thought
no.
okay.
I'm-
I don't know that you are. I
I'm
just wanted to make sure if I didn't
asking for a clarification
misspoke.
of where, I don't see Moffett on here, and so is that a restricted airspace, or does it come and go? Just for clarification.
Moffett is worked like, essentially like any other airport. It does have an area around the airport that is, designed to protect its arrivals and departures.
I'm hoping that this conversation is persuading the entire committee as to why this needs to be bullet pointed as one of the items on the longer term issues. Good?
Thank you.
Good. I don't want to cut it off, but I think this is indicative of just how challenging this issue is all by itself. Same with ongoing venue and forum. The message that I have heard loud and clear and that the various committee members have said is our work may be done mid-November, but the work that needs to be done long-term is clearly not going to be done. And the SFO roundtable has obviously served a critical role over the years, but if you're in Capitola, it's probably not tremendously relevant to your day-to-day existence, or even in Palo Alto. And lots of conversation has gone on previously about what next steps might be. Again, that's not in our purview, but it needs to be highlighted as something that folks will need to tackle And then again, the issue of noise measurement, everything from the conversation we've had today about day-night averaging to A-weighted, B-weighted decibels, clearly a larger conversation for another time. So we will highlight those. I'm not asking for a vote today, but I am sort of looking for nodding heads on a consensus basis so that when the time comes to bring back a document, people don't say, where on earth did he get the idea we wanted there, that thing's there. And as new issues arise, colleagues, please feel free to raise them on that. I think that rather than try and make our way through the process issues in just a matter of a couple of minutes, we'll just kick those to the next meeting a couple of weeks from now, if that's agreeable. As I said, I want to respect a number of folks that they had a hard stop at 4. Before we break, I want to say we'll see you in 2 weeks at our next meeting, 1 to 4. We outlined the timeline a little bit earlier. To the folks who are here and to your friends and neighbors who left, I do want to say, please know that we heard you during the 3 community hearings, the 10.5 hours, the 1,400 folks who showed up, the 250 speakers, the now more than 300 pieces of written correspondence that we have received, and through the 12 community groups that many of you are affiliated with, and through the emails that we continue to receive in great volume. I know when you are sitting and watching a discussion like this, the natural human inclination is to say, do these people have a clue what we're going through? I've been on that side of the dais. Many of us up here live in neighborhoods that are affected. Those who don't have really been, marvelous about bringing themselves up to speed very quickly. And so I want you to know there will be differences of opinion. I'm sure there'll be some rhetorical push and shove, but please know, in my experience, as I've worked with the members of the Select Committee up here, people do get it. They are earnestly trying to get us to mid-November with the best set of recommendations that we can send to our representatives of Congress so that they then feel like they can communicate clearly what the hopes and expectations of the 3 million people in these 3 counties are. On that note, thank you all once again, and without objection, we are adjourned for the day. We'll see you in 2 weeks.